Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty leagues, PPR leagues, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. As always, on Tuesdays, I'm by myself, and I'm Jeremiah Martinez, your host for today. Well, we got a lot to talk about Week 5. We know we got the Tom Brady returning. We got some notable performers from this past Sunday. But we're going to start with the Monday night football game that turned out to be kind of a doozy, sort of you say. But it did bring out some good fantasy performers from last night. So I want to talk about the running backs on both teams. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers did defeat the Carolina Panthers 17-14, but it did have a couple of good performances from the running backs. For the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Jacquizz Rodgers came in and rushed for over 100 yards and did get 28 passing yards as well. So he had a total of 129. He had no touchdowns, and he had about 35 touches in this game. And that was a lot. That was more than what I was expecting from such a little guy. And remember, Jacquizz Rodgers did play in this game because Charles Sims was ruled out. He actually got put on the IR before the game, and Doug Martin was out as well. So the Tampa Bay Buccaneers do have a bye week, but who will start at the running back position for the Bucs? Who will start for them right after the bye week? So all I gotta say is, they have the bye week, and then they play the 49ers in their next game. So whoever starts against that San Francisco team, they are a must-play. So if Doug Martin happens to come back for Week 7, he is a must-play. If Jacquizz Rodgers is a starter and Doug Martin can go after the bye week, Jacquizz Rodgers needs to be started in that game, because we saw how the San Francisco 49ers defense has been defending the run, and they have been terrible. But anyways, moving on to the Carolina Panthers side, we do have Cameron Artis-Payne. He had over 18 carries, 85 rushing yards, and 2 touchdowns. So it was a pretty good fantasy day for Artis-Payne owners right there. And if Jonathan Store happens to come back, the Panthers do play the Saints Week 6, and I do think whoever is the starting running back in that game, I think you have to play him as well, because the Saints defense had just been as bad as defending anybody. And my gosh, they cannot defend anybody. So moving on to other notable positional players, Mike Evans played a solid game. He had 89 receiving yards and a touchdown. And Greg Olsen, still playing like a top tight end in fantasy, having 181 yards receiving. And I think from here on out, Greg Olsen is probably a top 3 play if he wasn't already. Greg Olsen's just one of those guys that you're never going to sit him. He just keeps playing how he has been for the past few years. But with Jameis Winston kind of struggling yesterday, he didn't have a pick, but he did throw one touchdown and threw 219 yards. But for Derek Anderson, this was a pretty bad game. And Derek Anderson didn't really do much. He did have a couple of questionable picks, so I don't know if anyone was starting him last night, but he did not have a good game. But for the Panthers against the Saints on Sunday is, Cam Newton, I think he could be back because Cam Newton was in a concussion protocol. That's the reason why he missed this game. And all I got to say is Cam Newton a must start? Is he still a must start despite the Panthers' struggles? Looking at the schedule, the Saints, you have to play him in that game. I don't think the Saints' defense is going to contain Cam Newton in that game. And they do have a bye week, week 7. And they have 2 tough matchups against the Arizona Cardinals on October 30th and the Los Angeles Rams on November 6th. So those are 2 tough matchups. And I thought if Cam Newton would have played in this game, I think the Panthers would have won. I think the Panthers would have got back on track on offense. This is probably the perfect game for them to do it, and they just can't do it. They can't do it. And going against the Saints defense, I think this is the game where Cam Newton's going to get his fantasy year on track. And if he doesn't play well against the Saints, then there's going to be some question marks moving forward for Cam Newton. That's all I got to say. Well, going for the Tampa Bay starters here, they do play San Francisco week 7 after having a bye week, so I do say start whoever is the running back, whether that is Jacquizz Rodgers or Doug Martin. You have to start whoever starts at running back against the 49ers weekly. You have to do it. Mike Evans is going to be a top play that game. And if you need a streamer, maybe Jameis Winston can be a really good quarterback in your lineup in that game. But this was by no means a very good football game to watch. And I am actually going to talk about kickers in fantasy. Yes, because Robert Aguayo, he didn't do so well. And Robert, I don't know how many of you guys have Robert Aguayo on your teams, but he has struggled really, really bad this year. And I think he's 4 for 8. And I was really glad he made that last field goal because, if he didn't make that field goal to win the game, he probably would not be on that team. So I think Robert Aguayo is probably a kicker that's probably not going to be on your roster this year, but I think next year he's someone that's really going to be one of the top place kickers in the game, in all fantasy, but that is next year. I'm just letting you know right now. Next year, I think he's going to be a top place kicker in the game. And we'll move on to some defense here. The Panthers they didn't get a pick off of Jameis Winston yesterday. And the Bucs did play really solid against this Panthers offense. And I really thought the Panthers defense was they were going to put on a good performance against Jameis Winston. But looking at the numbers here, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense played really well. They had 4 turnovers. 4 turnovers. And then they had 2 sacks. So it was a real good game for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, fantasy-wise. And moving forward to both of these teams here. Moving forward, like I said, Cam Newton, I think he's a must-play against the Saints this coming Sunday. I do think whoever starts at running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Jacquizz Rodgers or Doug Martin, they're must-plays in Week 7, coming off the bye, heading into their game against San Francisco. And I think Jameis Winston will be a quarterback streamer in that game. But Cam Newton is a must-play against the Saints on this coming Sunday for Week 6. And if he struggles in that game, then there will be question marks moving forward. But we're going to take our first break here at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, and I will talk about notable performers. And that's right, one of them is Tom Brady. Tom Brady came back to the Patriots, people, and I'm going to talk about his status moving forward, as well as some other notable players that put on quite a show for your fantasy lineups this past Sunday. So we'll be right back here at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And we got to talk about some notable performers from the past Sunday. And, of course, I'm going to start with no other than Tom Brady. He finally came back this past Sunday against the Cleveland Browns. And, man, he did not disappoint. He passed for over 400 yards, 3 touchdowns against a lowly Browns defense, and he is a must-start moving forward, people. Remember, we seen what Brady has done last year, and he is back. He is back better than ever. He has a chip on his shoulder, and he even said at 39 years old, he feels better than he was at 29. So he looks like he is in the best football shape of his life at 39 years old. He is someone that I would be excited about to have on my team, and moving on to the other Patriots in this game against the Cleveland Browns. Martellus Bennett played a really good game. He was someone that was on he was on my fantasy radar for this past week, and I really do liked him in this game because the matchup was really good. It was too great. And for the Martellus Bennett, he had 3 touchdowns and 67 yards. He had 3 touchdowns, though, and they were all from 7 yards and out. But if you're open, Tom Brady is going to give you the ball. So I do like Martellus Bennett moving forward. And people thought, Martellus Bennett did have a really great game, so Gronk must not play great. Gronk played really well. He had 7 targets and had 109 receiving yards. So I do think Martellus Bennett is a top 10 play moving. I think he's a top 10 tight end this year. I think he's going to end as a top 10 tight end. And, of course, Gronk's probably going to be a top 3. And when Gronk was the top tight end in the fantasy game, remember, Aaron Hernandez was still with the Patriots, and he was also a top 5 fantasy tight end as well. So whenever Gronk is going to get covered, Martellus Bennett is going to get open, and once Bennett starts to get game plan for, and that leaves room for Gronk as well. So I think both of these tight ends, they're both players that you have to have in your lineups now, and Bennett, his upside is not as high as Gronk because, it's Gronk. He's the best tight end in the game. But Martellus Bennett, you should not be afraid to start him, man. He is... I do like to consider him maybe a boom or a bust tight end, but when you have Tom Brady as your quarterback, you have to take that chance. You have to take that chance. And remember, tight end is not a great position to begin with. So I do think Martellus Bennett is someone you need in your lineup moving forward. But getting back to Tom Brady, man, how exciting was it for him to play again? And coming off a 4-game suspension. And it looks like he's going to even have a better fantasy year than he did last year. Man, feels good to see Tom Brady back. But moving on to other top performers this week, we got Marcus Mariota. Yes, he had a real good game for the Titans against the Miami Dolphins. He had 103 passing yards, but did have 4 total touchdowns. He had 3 through the air, 1 through on the ground, and he also added 60 yards on the ground as well. So Marcus Mariota looks like he is kind of somewhat putting it all together, but he did play against a bad Miami Dolphins defense, so take that into account. But he looks like someone you can look out for as a streamer, so to speak. And then Ben Roethlisberger, he's just keep playing like Big Ben. He had 380 passing yards and 4 touchdowns against the New York Jets in a rout, so to speak, as they won 31-13. Phil Rivers, he's still playing up really good fantasy numbers, even though the team is bad. But Phil Rivers is still making your fantasy team good. He had 359 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, but he did throw 2 picks. And Ezekiel Elliott, he looks like he's on his way to being the top fantasy running back. He's definitely going that way, trending that way, that is. He had 134 rushing yards. That's his 3rd straight 100-yard game. 2 rushing touchdowns and 37 receiving touchdowns. And I don't have to go any further, but Ezekiel is a top play every week, and he finally played a very solid defense in the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Cowboys really handed it to them in this game. So Ezekiel is definitely a top running back, and I do think he's going to finish as a top 3, top 2 running back in fantasy by the year's end. And we got Sammy Coates. Yes, the Pittsburgh Steelers slot receiver. He had a good game. 139 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. But his day would have been even better if he didn't have 4 drops. And Sammy Coates was someone, he looks like he's very highly involved in the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. And with Antonio Brown drawing multiple coverages, double teams that is, it leaves Coates open for the deep ball. And the vertical game is a very integral part of what the Steelers do. And I do like what I'm seeing from Coates, but he just has to learn how to not have many drops as he did. And I do think he's someone that he is a boom or bust receiver to put in your lineups. But if you really do need receiver help, he's someone that you have to get on your team. Yeah, he's someone that you have to get on your team. And those are my top performers for week 5. We're going to take our second break here at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, and I'm going to talk to you about some waiver wire pickups that you need on your team for week 6. We'll be right back here at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And now it's time to talk about the top waiver wire pickups for week 6. And of course, I've already talked about Sammy Coates, the game that he had against the New York Jets. You know, he had 139 yards and 2 touchdowns and had 11 targets, but also had 4 drops in that game. And he could have had a better game than he originally had, but he's someone that needs to be taken very seriously because he has big play potential and the Steelers offense that loves to throw vertical. Big Ben loves to throw it deep. But he is the top waiver wire priority this week. And that leads me to a run on receivers here. It looks like a lot of receivers have performed really well this weekend. And one of them is Chris Hogan, the New England Patriots receiver. He had a pretty good game against the Browns in Tom Brady's return. He had 114 yards. He did have only 4 receptions, but he brings an element to the Patriots game that they haven't had in a while. He brings a lot of speed. He brings a deep threat to the game. And he's someone that really needs to be taken seriously because you remember Tom Brady had that chemistry with Hogan in the preseason. And when it seems like Tom Brady really makes everyone better in this team, and as with a lot of weapons that the New England Patriots have, it looks like it can be anyone's day at any given Sunday. So Chris Hogan is someone that needs to be taken seriously as well, and he's someone that you should need to pick up if you can't get Sammy Coates, because he's probably the most popular waiver wire pickup this week. Chris Hogan is someone that you also need on your lineup. And that leads me to another receiver on a pretty bad team. That is Jeremy Curley. He did have a real good game against the Arizona Cardinals on Thursday Night Football. Anthony and I talked about Jeremy Curley and the 49ers offense on Friday's show. And I said Jeremy Curley is someone you need to actually start having your eye on. And I think he's someone that you can potentially pick up if you can't get Hogan or Sammy Coates, if you need receiver help. Jeremy Curley had 102 yards and 1 touchdown, and he's had that for 2 consecutive games. And he has a really good chemistry with Blaine Gabbert, but with Colin Kaepernick most likely playing against the Buffalo Bills on Sunday, I don't think it's going to hurt Jeremy Curley's status at all. Jeremy Curley has been the one consistent receiver to get open for the 49ers, and I do like him moving forward. He has so far 26 receptions and 304 yards and 2 touchdowns. He is someone that could be a 1,000-yard receiver for a bad San Francisco 49ers team, and that's saying a lot. So I do like Jeremy Curley. I do think he is a boom or bust option, though, because of the team he's on. But he's someone that should be taken very seriously in fantasy. And he is playing a tough team in Buffalo, so I will probably send him for that game. But he's someone that you need to pick up if you can't get Chris Hogan or Sammy Coates. And that leads me to my last receiver here, Cameron Meredith from the Chicago Bears. He had a really good game on Sunday against the Detroit Lions. He had 130 yards and 1 touchdown. And he did have 12 targets. He had more than Alshon Jeffrey. It seems like Alshon Jeffrey is just not the top receiver as we thought we were drafting. It seems like last week, Eddie Royal was a top receiver. Cameron Meredith is now the top receiver. Meredith may be a one-week wonder, but it seems like Alshon Jeffrey can get it right with Brian Hoyer. Ever since Brian Hoyer has been the starter here in Chicago, Alshon Jeffrey just hasn't put up top receiver numbers like we thought he should. But Cameron Meredith is someone you should definitely be somewhat skeptical about because of it is just one game, and they do have lots of receivers there that can possibly have a really great game in the game Sunday. But remember, Alshon Jeffrey's not putting the same numbers as we thought he would. The Bears put Kevin White on the IR. And Eddie Royal, he's not going to have 100 yards every game. He did have 9 targets against the Colts, but as Eddie Royal, he's more of a slot guy anyway. And Cameron Meredith, He does have a pretty tall body, so he looks like he can be a potential red zone target for Brian Hoyer or Jay Cutler, whoever the Bears decide is their quarterback for the rest of the season. But he's someone that I would keep my eye on. And if you really need a receiver and you can't get Colts, Hogan, or Curley, Meredith is the guy to go. And those are the receivers that need to be picked up this week in fantasy. And all I have here left, I have 2 quarterbacks and 1 running back. The 2 quarterbacks I have, Marcus Mariota and Alex Smith. Marcus Mariota had a great game against the Miami Dolphins, and if you looked at his upcoming schedule, he has the Cleveland Browns, the Indianapolis Colts, and the Jacksonville Jaguars. So he has 3 really good matchups moving forward for the rest of the month. And if you are streaming quarterbacks, you need to pick Marcus Mariota up if you really need quarterback help. If you look at the game he had against a very bad defense, imagine what he can do against an even worse defense, because Cleveland, Indianapolis, and Jacksonville, they can't play defense at all. Mariota looks like he's on the rise in fantasy. And the other quarterback is Alex Smith. And I know Alex Smith is a very boring fantasy player. He's not going to get you a lot of stats every week, but Alex Smith actually has a very favorable schedule this month. He has the Oakland Raiders off a bye week. He has the New Orleans Saints, the Indianapolis Colts, and he has the Jaguars. You have to take that. You have to stream him. And if you really need quarterback help, and if you've been streaming quarterbacks for the past first month of the season, Alex Smith is the guy to stream if you have a quarterback on a bye week or you just streaming quarterbacks in general. But Alex Smith looks like he is going to put up, I'm not saying he's going to throw for 3. I'm not saying he's going to have like 30 points a game, but these are really good matchups for him to succeed in fantasy. And I think you should give Alex Smith a shot with the schedule coming up. And I do have one running back here I think should be considered for fantasy, and that's James White for the New England Patriots. He put up some pretty reasonable numbers with Tom Brady back. It seems like LeGarrette Blount is pretty much the pure runner and the New England Patriots offensive system. But James White, he is more of the PPR play type of guy. You know, he's going to get you a lot of yards through the air. He's highly involved in the passing game, especially with Tom Brady back. He did have 63 yards against the Browns. He did have 5 carries for 26 yards, so he had 9 total touches. So he's someone I would consider if you really need some help in PPR play. And with Dion Lewis, I think he's someone that should be a must-stash right now. Dion Lewis is also someone you should stash. And remember, James White, he's probably going to play until Dion Lewis comes back, because we seen what Dion Lewis did last year. If you are in a PPR league, Dion Lewis is a must-stash right now. In standard leagues, I will wait a little bit because he may not come back until October 18th. But Dion Lewis is someone that you need to stash right now in PPR leagues. And these are my top waiver wire pickups for week 6. And this is the end of the show. And I thank you guys for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. You can catch this show every Tuesday and Friday. Anthony will be back on Friday. We will talk about the Thursday night football game. And, of course, we will preview some matchups for week 6. And we will tell you who to start, who to sit. And you can catch this show on a variety of platforms, just as iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, and as well as on the website, GSMCpodcast.com. You can also follow the show on Twitter at GSMC_FFootball. And you can follow us on Instagram as well at GSMC_FFootball. And you can like the show on Facebook at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And I'm Jeremiah Martinez, and I will see you on Friday. And thanks for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.